What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you're all doing well as usual. And I just got home from an early IMAX screening of the latest installment into the MCU and the first ever proper introduction of Marvel's first family into the MCU. And this film is called Fantastic Four: First Steps. Directed by Shakman, this film stars people like Pedro, Pascal, Vanessa, Kirby, Joseph Quinn, Ebon, Moss-Bachrach, and more. So in nearly 7 years of covering movies here on YouTube, movies and television, I have covered dozens of comic book related movies and television shows, and in the Marvel world, I've covered every MCU installment, including tons of Marvel movies and shows that were not directly attached to the MCU or didn't come out under Marvel Studios, but I've never actually covered anything Fantastic Four related. But growing up as a kid, I loved these characters, whether it be through the comic book, specifically the Jack Kirby run for many years that I used to love reading over and over and over again, the video games, or most notably the movies that came out when I was a kid in the 2000s that I always felt really captured the tone of the characters, even if it didn't really capture all of the characters, most notably Galactus, who's in here, and even Doctor Doom. I don't feel like it fully honored the comic books, but in terms of tone, I feel like it captured it. But as far as the cartoons as well from the 90s, which I have the full DVD set of right behind me here on this shelf, the characters were characters I always loved, and I always wanted to see them done properly. And here we are so far into the MCU, and they'd yet to be a part of it outside of a quick cameo from John Krasinski as like kind of a fan casting nod to the fans in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. I was hoping they would eventually bring them into the fold. Of course, licensing had them somewhere else. We had some pretty weak films in the franchise, like the original from the 90s and the Fan 4 stick from the 2010s that we just do not talk about. But here we are now with their first proper installment into the MCU, setting up for their appearance in the latest Avengers film that's supposed to be coming in the next couple of years, unless they delay it. And with all that said, let's get into what this film is all about, and then we'll get into my thoughts on the film. Set in a retro-futuristic New York in 1960, this film is separate from the main MCU timeline and explores their early missions as they confront cosmic threats and grapple with their place in a strange, rapidly evolving universe, culminating in a confrontation with Galactus, the World Eater. So when this film was first announced, I think a lot of people were questioning, where is this going to fit in? Is it going to be an origin story? But then they ended up announcing that it was going to be in an alternate timeline, which I've heard the creators have flat out said they did that simply to avoid the question, or be able to simply answer the question of, well, where were they during the events of Endgame and everything that happened with Thanos? The quick answer is they're in another timeline, but as we already know, these characters will appear in future Avengers films, so there's going to be a lot more with them. And so going into this, knowing that, I knew it was going to be, for the most part, a self-contained story that I'm sure was going to tease into things, and that's exactly what we get here. This is a film that is its own self-contained story and focuses on the Fantastic Four and their confrontation with Galactus. You have the Silver Surfer in here as well, and we'll get into that in just a second. But outside of a mid-credit scene that teases their events moving forward, this doesn't really, lean into trying to be a cameo film or anything that's really connecting itself to other things, which I think is the right step. If you have a movie that's set in an alternate timeline and you want to introduce these characters, you don't want to make it a thing where it's all about connecting and having all these cameos and different things like that. So I like that this film focused on itself, and Shakman, who directs this film, actually directed all 9 episodes of WandaVision, which I think most people tend to have a lot of positive outlooks on, and I think very much similar to WandaVision, having this distinct tone and feel and look to it. I think this film does the exact same thing, and I think Shakman was a great director to bring into the fold for this, because he 100% captures that 60s vibe that's leaning into this retro futuristic kind of thing where things are a little bit more heightened than they actually were in the 60s, of course, because it has that the technology and the smarts of somebody like Reed Richards in the center of it all, but also very much still kind of has this old school vibe to it, which gave it this really cool look, this really cool vibe. And just in general, I would argue that this is maybe one of the most unique films in the MCU tonally and visually. The style of the film and Michael Giacchino's score that I'm going to be humming in my head or singing out loud in my car to myself many days to come, and I look forward to rewatching this film simply for that score as well. I think Michael Giacchino absolutely killed it, and while the Fantastic Four part of it, where it's sung with a choir, is a little bit goofy, I love that this film fully embraced the cheese of the Fantastic Four. That's something that the last film, the Fan Four Stick that a lot of people like to call it, just got wrong. It wanted to make it grounded and darker, but I think part of what makes Fantastic Four what it is just leaning into the goofiness of it. You have a team of people that are called Marvel's first family. They're called the Fantastic Four. They don't have some cool name like the Avengers or the X-Men or the Justice League. They're the Fantastic Four. You have a stretchy guy and his wife who can turn invisible, and you got the big rock guy and the, hot shot who can turn on fire. In general, their concept is goofy, and I think what makes them charming, what makes them endearing is leaning into the cheese. And I think everything about the tone, the look, the feel of this film, the setting, the way that they chose to, make it bright and colorful and put them in these blue costumes that feel very much like they pull from the comics, I think was all the right choices in embracing the cheese of these characters, which allowed the moments that really settle down and spend time with these characters to work. And it just felt like, in general, Matt Shakman had a vision for this film. And I think when you look at an overarching franchise that has a lot of installments that some people might think all feel the same, and kind of you just have directors coming in to just kind of fill a spot, this is a film within the MCU that feels like you had somebody at the top with a vision that was kind of keeping things in line while also dabbling in the world of the MCU that we know and love, being able to have those elements of levity, being able to have those moments of action and visuals and those things that you want out of a Marvel comic book action movie, but being able to have a director bring some unique identity to the franchise. And I was really excited with that. As we were about halfway through the film, I was just thinking, man, I'm really liking how different this film feels from previous things in the MCU, while also feeling like it slides right in to some of the more unique and some of the better installments into the franchise. So immediately I was really impressed with what Matt Shakman did. And then when it comes down to our lead characters, the Fantastic Four, I thought they were all really, really well done here. Pedro Pascal plays Reed Richards, and while he's an actor a lot of people are kind of getting tired of in the modern day because he seems to be in everything, and recently in this summer he has been in a lot. Just recently here on the channel, I've covered him in things like The Materialist or The Last of Us Season 2 or Eddington, but here he is now playing Reed Richards. And I think for the most part, though, he does a good job of leaning into this very intelligent, really, really cool kind of different kind of character. It does feel like Pedro Pascal at times, but I think for the most part, you do lose him in that. And I think a lot of that also has to do with the script that he's given and the surrounding cast, the tone. I think the direction from Matt Shakman definitely allows him to not just feel like Pedro Pascal in another role. Vanessa Kirby, I think, does a great job as the character of Invisible Woman, Sue Storm. She's a character I think a lot of people in the modern day tend to think of Jessica Alba because of how good she looked in that role. But when you think of the comic book version of the character, the way she looks, the way she acts, a lot of the dialogue she has, I think that Vanessa Kirby really captured Sue Storm very well here. When it comes down to the Human Torch, Johnny Storm, played by Joseph Quinn here, I think he does a good job. I do think there are moments that you could tell they were trying to go with a little bit more of a different approach to the character. I do remember seeing interviews of him saying that they were going to maybe move away from certain elements of that character, but they don't move away so much that he doesn't feel recognizable. For the most part, that kind of, sweet talking, quick to kind of be snarky character is still very much there. And I think he brings something new to the character, especially with that 1960s setting that feels like it fits into that world. And then when it comes down to Ben Grimm, the Thing, you have Ebon Moss-Bachrach coming into the role. And he's an actor that I have very little experience with outside of the Andor show, the prequel to Rogue One in the Star Wars franchise. I know he's really big on The Bear as well right now, but I actually haven't seen that show. And so being able to kind of go into this with not a whole lot of, connection to him as an actor, I think he did a really good job with the motion capture. I think The Thing and a lot of the CGI in the film is a little hit or miss. There are moments where it looks really good, but there are a couple of moments with The Thing, or sometimes the flames around the Human Torch, or some moments of green screen, or just a couple of moments of CGI that maybe looked a little bit cartoony. But I will say, on the flip side of that, as I was saying before about the goofy tone, I've always been an advocate for when a comic book movie is able to lean into CGI that's a little bit cartoony as long as it fits the tone. So even though there were a couple of moments that I feel like some of the CGI could have been polished a little bit better, I do think anytime that it is a little bit goofy looking, it does match the tone of the film. So I do tend to have a little bit more grace for it in those areas. But the film also utilizes some great practical effects, has some great costume design, design and set design throughout the course of the film that definitely puts you in that time period of the 60s, while also having that retro futuristic vibe that, again, gives it its own identity. And the film is also riddled with a bunch of little Easter eggs and references to other players within the world of Marvel, but specifically the Fantastic Four, like side characters, some of the villain of the week type characters, like Mole Man, who's in here, who doesn't have much to do in the film, but serves a role. I think in terms of side characters, there are a couple of side characters in the film that are kind of sidelined, that have enough screen time for you to be like, yeah, that's a character in the film, but don't do enough with them throughout the course of the film where you feel like they, really feel like they're worth being there. There are a couple characters I feel like you're like, did they want to do more with them, but they ultimately didn't, but you don't really know whether they did or didn't because the film doesn't fully commit to doing more with them. They could be setting up for more with these characters moving forward, but I think that for a tighter film, there are a couple of side characters that they probably could have trimmed out that don't really feel like they serve too much of a purpose in the story itself. But as far as our villain characters in the film, of course, you have the Silver Surfer here that many people would just call the female Silver Surfer. There was all these conversations about, them kind of going woke and having this female Silver Surfer, but this is a character from the comics, the character of Shala Ball, who is the Silver Surfer here. She's played by Julia Garner, who I also don't have an abundance of experience with as an actress. I saw her in Wolfman earlier this year, the remake, and I didn't really love her in that film, but I also didn't really love that film. But here I think she does such a great job as Silver Surfer. She looks so cool. I like the CGI around her character was pretty cool, and just in general, that character has some of the coolest shots in the film. There are some awesome moments of action, and Michael Giacchino's score really adds to a lot of the really cool moments around her character. She's a character that I wish they had done a little bit more with in the film, but they do enough to kind of, give you some really cool moments with her and make her a character that's definitely memorable when you walk out of the movie. And of course, she is the herald to Galactus, who is played by Ralph Ineson here, who once I heard he was cast in the role, I was like, oh, perfect casting, because he's got the voice, he's just got that presence to him. And while the character of Galactus is a big CG character in the film, I think for the most part he looks really good, and it's just nice to have Galactus be Galactus, not have him be this, big CGI cloud that's coming for the planet, and instead actually be this big, Titan character that we all know from the comics. It's nice to see him done properly. And just in general, I like that this film embraced the comic books and embraced what Jack Kirby and the very many, comic book artists and writers have done with these characters over the course of years. It embraced the goofiness even of the cartoons I grew up watching. And I just think when I look at this film overall, it's just really well made and clearly is a love letter to what's come before in this franchise. I think the first act is really, really exciting and propels things in a really fun way. I think the second act slows down a little bit, but ultimately I think still does some pretty interesting things. And then the third act does some cool things to kind of resolve the story. Now leaning into my negatives, though I am very positive on the film, I do think that this film at times is too convenient. It's a film that naturally is predictable because you know that these characters are going to have more. So there are moments in the film that I feel like the film wants you to feel more for the characters, or that there's a higher sense of stakes, but we already know that these characters have already been cast and announced to be cast in upcoming Avengers films, so you know that nothing too terrible is going to happen to them, which is kind of the unfortunate thing of kind of setting up things for the future before we get to see all of the installments. But outside of that, the film also in its middle section, when they're trying to figure out how to take out Galactus in the film, does lean a little bit too much into things that just are convenient. Characters learning something for the sake of them being able to do something else, characters figuring something out, there being little time jumps, maybe a couple weeks here or a month here for them to kind of build something or figure something out, where it just feels like certain things are rushed and then it doesn't always feel like it means something, which ultimately led to a final battle against Galactus that had a lot of moments where I was like, oh, that's convenient for them to take him out, or that's convenient for them to do that against him. So there was a lot of convenience in the film and predictability, but despite that, I still found it to be a fun movie that really, for me, honored the legacy of these characters from the comic books. It felt like a big Saturday morning cartoon while also having a cool, grounded approach to these characters at the same time. It leaned into the goofiness, and I just walked out of it thinking that was a good, fun time with a fun musical score. It was visually enticing. It was really cool to see in IMAX. Just the audio was great, the visuals of it all were great, and it has me really excited to see what they do with the Fantastic Four moving forward into the MCU as we get closer into the Avengers. And
I forgot to mention it up to this point, but it was just great to also see Kirby in here, even though, he doesn't serve grand purpose in the film. He's just a fun little side character. It's great to see a character from the comics like that be in a Fantastic Four movie. It just makes me think look how far we've come compared to the comic book movies that oftentimes felt like they just didn't want to embrace little characters like this. They just wanted to take the big ones that people knew and throw them in a movie, even if it meant leaving out characters that just kind of add to the world and add to just making you feel like you're in that comic book.
And there's a mid-credit scene that has me incredibly excited for what's to come, with a post-credit scene at the very end that's a little bit more goofy. So overall, that's my long rambly thoughts on the new Fantastic Four film. What are you guys thinking? Are you planning on checking it out? Have you already checked it out? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.